Among the groups fighting against Israel's ongoing genocide on Palestine is one that leftists tend to relate to most, but also know very little about it. Today, it occupies a weaker position among the resistance alliance compared to the Islamic factions, but it was once the second largest force, its history and influence being a central pillar in the fight for Palestinian liberation. There's a lot of misconceptions about it in liberal scholarship, of course, but also among the left, and we're gonna talk about some of its leftist critics. Understanding Palestine means understanding this force, a beacon of internationalism and anti-imperialism, contributing to the science of making revolution and crucially shaping the concrete strategies to liberate the occupied homeland. How did it apply Marxism to the harsh realities of Palestine? How did they analyze the class struggle in connection with Palestinian Arab nationalism and the issue of the Israeli working class? How did it differ from other leftist factions? And why did its relative position within the resistance decline? In order to grasp the challenges relevant to Palestine today, and most importantly, to understand our own role in the struggle for a free Palestine and against imperialism, it is crucial to learn about the movement that entered into world fame with spectacular actions, that fought fiercely against normalization, struggled against betrayal and collaboration in the Arab world and within their own country, and a movement that applied the ideology of Marxism-Leninism to the liberation of Palestine. Before we start, I just want to say thank you to all those who keep supporting the channel with donations. These videos require a huge amount of time, and each new supporter helps me immensely to keep going. So if you find this work valuable, consider to check out the Patreon link down below. Thank you. Lida, July 1948. A massacre. 30,000 Palestinians forced onto the roads, marching for 3 days without food or water, driven from their homes by Zionist forces, losing everything. Witnessing this horror that led to his sister's death was a young, previously apolitical medical student. Years later, he remembered what became known as the Lida Death March. The Israelis came to Lida and forced us to flee. It is a picture that does not leave my mind and that I will never forget. 30,000 people walking, crying, screaming with terror. This trauma would fuel his lifelong quest for Palestinian liberation. That young medical student was George Habash, also known as El-Hakim, future doctor and first General Secretary of Al-Jabha Shabiya Li-Tahrir Palestine, in English, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In the last video, we introduced a faction which would come to be the largest force in Palestinian resistance, Fatah, with the well-known Yasser Arafat as its leader. Disappointed by the Arab failure to defend the Zionist takeover of Palestine during the Nakba, Fatah focused on independent Palestinian action for liberation. Its main competitor in the mid-60s was the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which was created by the Arab states and was to a great extent under its influence. You can watch that video after you finish this one, but keep in mind that that information is key if you want to understand the decisions of the PFLP in the next videos, as it will become Arafat's chief Palestinian opponent. The people around Habash, who eventually founded the PFLP, also called the Front, were first part of another important organization alongside Fatah, which we have to talk about first. After being forced to live in exile as a refugee, George Habash ended up at the American University of Beirut, AUB, a hub of intellectual ferment. Here, influenced by professors preaching Arab unity and progress, and surrounded by others who shared the scars of '48, the seeds were sown. Here, he met people like Wadi Haddad, another Palestinian Christian like Habash, whose family fled Safed in '48. Haddad also studied medicine at UAB. Together, they founded the Arab Nationalist Movement, the ANM, around 1951. The ANM's initial goal was clear: Palestine's liberation. But crucially, they saw this as achievable only after uniting Arab nations and freeing them from Western colonial control. So these guys weren't short on ambition. As Haddad famously told recruits, the road to Tel Aviv passes through Damascus, Baghdad, Amman, and Cairo. This was Pan-Arabism, heavily influenced by the rising star of Egypt's Jamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser's anti-Western stance, his nationalization of the Suez Canal, his support for Algeria's liberation struggle resonated deeply with the ANM. They hitched their wagon to this star, believing Arab unity under his leadership was the prerequisite for confronting the Zionist entity. A short note on the emergence of Arab nationalism, since this is a very important concept here. The development of modern Arab history was characterized by a dominant merchant character, with the exception of peasant-based Egypt. Long-distance trade facilitated that Arabic was homogenized throughout the majority Sunni Islamic region, isolating distinct agricultural regions, often Berber and Shiite. Islamic law, for instance, reflects this merchant-centric nature. This is in contrast to Europe's feudal, peasant-based structure that contributed to diversification into nations and faster capitalist development. This structure was fragile, collapsing when trade routes shifted away, and hindered the emergence of capitalism in the Arab world until forced to integrate by imperialism. Imperialism subordinated these economies and created a dependent local capitalist class. The capitalists aspiring to independent industrialization, the national bourgeoisie, were weak and hindered in their development, often overshadowed by collaborator agrarian elements content with the status quo. This led to unstable political parties heavily influenced by the petty bourgeoisie, and ultimately the rise of Nasserism, where the state substituted for the weak private bourgeoisie. From the beginning, the struggle against Zionism meant struggle against colonialism and imperialism, and the Palestinian question became the central test for the Arab leadership's anti-imperialist credentials. This was the test which first broke the collaborator capitalist parties and which will soon break the new ones. In South Lebanon, the Arab nationalist movement recruited young, sharp intellectuals like Mohsen Ibrahim, whose grasp of theory would later steer the movement decisively towards Marxism. Other key figures soon joined. One certain brilliant writer and future PFLP spokesman was recruited by Habash in Damascus in 1953. His name, Ghassan Kanafani. Another was a certain AUB student who had witnessed her family being forcibly displaced and who joined the ANM at age 15. She also wanted to join its military arm, but wasn't allowed to do so. Yet. The ANM wasn't just talk. They even organized resistance against UN resettlement camps, seeing them as attempts to liquidate the Palestinian cause, and built clandestine cells in refugee camps, especially among UNRWA teachers. One such teacher would later join the PFLP, a certain Ahmad Saadat. He will also make history within the front. During the 1958 Lebanon crisis, when pro-Western Maronite Christian President Shamoun resisted joining Nasser's United Arab Republic and called in American troops under the Eisenhower Doctrine, ANM members like Habash, Ibrahim, and a certain Hawatmeh were smuggling weapons and fighting Shamoun, supporting more progressive figures. It's not the last time we would see a progressive alliance between Palestinian and Lebanese forces, but more on this in the next video. Seeing US Marines land in Beirut, naked gunboat diplomacy cemented their view of American imperialism as the primary enemy of the Arab people, propping up reactionary regimes and the Zionist state. The people around Ibrahim began questioning the simple pan-Arab formula, arguing that social and economic structures and the class struggle were key. They saw the need for social revolution as interlinked with national liberation. By 1964, splits emerged between those wanting closer ties to Nasser versus those largely disillusioned after the Syria-Egypt-UAR split, demanding a focus on Palestine and independent action. Habash, trying to hold things together, agreed to form an autonomous Palestinian branch within the ANM. But he remained cautious about independent Palestinian military action. They avoided large attacks on Israel because they didn't want to force Egypt's leader, Nasser, into fighting Israel too soon. Kanafani captured this tightrope walk when he said that Palestinian action should be, quote, above zero but below entanglement. At this point, the A&M opposed the notion of a Palestinian entity, fearing that it would make Arab states not care about it anymore. However, as they watched Fatah gain traction, they felt the pressure from their own impatient base. Then came June 1967, Al-Naqsa, a catastrophe that dwarfed even the Nakba in many ways. The Arab armies were shattered, the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, Golan Heights, lost. Nasserism lay exposed and humiliated. This defeat was the ultimate catalyst. It proved, in blood and fire, the failure of the Arab nationalist leadership, as the A&M itself admitted in stark self-criticism shortly after. The path forward had to be different. While Fatah escalated its operations, the A&M talked to other groups like Ahmad Jibril's Palestine Liberation Front to unite it with its Palestinian branch. Fatah and Jibril will be the only ones to reap the credit, and that will finish us. Finally, the A&M's Palestine branch, Jibril's PLF, and other small factions decided to unite and announce their presence with a bang. Starting with an attack on Ben Gurion Airport on December 11, 1967, the decision was announced from Beirut. A new front had been forged in the fires of defeat and disillusionment. A front committed not just to guerrilla warfare, but increasingly to a Marxist-Leninist analysis of the struggle against Zionism, imperialism, and Arab reaction. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was born. One crucial difference to Fatah was that the PFLP connected Palestinian liberation to the class struggles in surrounding Arab states, while Fatah cared less about what's happening outside Palestine. Later in this series, we will see the important consequences of this. Another key difference was that Fatah operated as a broad-based movement, encompassing diverse ideologies without a clear, unified ideological framework for liberation. Instead, it prioritized concrete, day-to-day practice to defeat the enemy, an approach that would also carry ramifications. While the front was much more ideologically homogeneous, it also had a front character, as its name implied, encompassing various groups that kept their individual leadership at the time. One branch carried a similar name to Hamas's military arm today, named after famous martyr Izz al-Qassam. Naming military brigades after martyrs is a common thing in Palestine. The PFLP will do the same. At the beginning, however, the front's focus wasn't coherently Marxist-Leninist. But with the failure of the Six-Day War, there came a crucial shift. The bourgeois leaders disappointed, while the lower classes displayed much more determination in pushing national liberation forward, as was the case in many other liberation struggles. The front now more clearly envisioned a Palestinian-led peasants on the blazing earth, the poor and oppressed in our cities, villages, and the miserable camps, to liberate the homeland instead of reliance on the Arab states, which could not be trusted. Liberating Palestine wasn't just part of a wider Arab revolution, it was now seen as a precondition for it. The fight over occupied Palestine is a, quote, active part of the march of the Arab Revolution against world imperialism and its agents' forces. The 67 defeat also brought a sobering reality check. Gone was the unrealistic talk of swift victory that preceded the war. The PFLP emphasized a long-term and bitter struggle instead of the short-term military adventure of the Arab states. This shift showed the growing influence of Chairman Mao's thought, the idea of the protracted People's War. Trying to defeat Israel with conventional militaries is a bourgeois illusion. Along came the realization that the defeat exposed a complex web of colonial and class-based alliances connecting the US, Israel, and reactionary Arab governments. This was also the period where revolutionaries broke with many big established communist parties that had ossified into reformism and a reliance on peaceful means. Inspired by China's Cultural Revolution and the events that led to the strikes of May '68 in France. It's also where the Sino-Soviet split reached its high point. The USSR supported the general Arab cause against Israel, primarily through its relationships with key Arab states like Egypt. But it viewed the stability of these states as paramount for its influence in the Middle East, and thus were initially critical of the, quote, mythical diversionary groups, since these provoked Israeli retaliation prematurely and were supposedly orchestrated, quote, by well-known services or agencies of these services for provocation purposes. According to Arafat, it wasn't until 1970 that Soviet leaders called the guerrilla fighters a progressive and patriotic liberation movement. Mao's China had broken with the Soviet Union, partly because of the latter's shift toward the so-called peaceful coexistence policy, which it labeled as revisionism and a betrayal of revolutionary principles. While China would become the biggest supporter of Fatah, it also supported the front, while being much less disturbed by its guerrilla actions. Today, China doesn't arm or train any resistance factions, but is Israel's second largest trading partner. Arafat said the People's Republic of China was, quote, the biggest influence in supporting our revolution and strengthening its perseverance. And George Habash insisted, quote, our best friend is China. China, being a champion of global anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movements, had an effect on the front's outlook and gradual adoption of Marxism. But there was another crucial factor in this shift, one which was internal. This intense period also brought internal fractures. Ideological and generational schisms that were present before '67 now cracked open. In March 1968, front leader Habash was arrested in Syria. He was accused of involvement in destroying a pipeline, though suspicions of plotting a coup against the Syrian government also lingered. Habash's charisma had been a unifying force. His absence left a vacuum, allowing tensions to escalate. A group around often non-Palestinian members like Nayef Hawatmeh and Muhsin Ibrahim were involved with the newspaper Al-Hurriya. These former A&M cadres grew louder in their criticism of the older PFLP leadership, whom they saw as resistant to a full embrace of Marxist-Leninist class analysis and too supportive of Arab nationalist leaders. At the PFLP conference in August 1968, the Hurriya group pushed the PFLP to issue a basic political statement, which identified Arab governments like Egypt and Syria as petty bourgeois failures. This infuriated Nasser, who then cut off PFLP funding. Ahmad Jibril, acting leader during Habash's imprisonment and more conservative, couldn't hold the factions together. He ultimately left with his followers in October 1968. Syria, which supported him, also pushed for this split. He disagreed with the Marxist-Leninist direction the PFLP was taking under the leadership of Habash. Hawatmeh annoyed him especially. Jibril favored a more militaristic and less ideologically driven approach to the Palestinian struggle, and formed the PFLP General Command. This faction will become very important later. So the front was mired in splits and contradictions, which made it even harder to catch up to Fatah. A month later, Habash escaped from prison. The escape was famously organized by fellow front leader Haddad, reportedly involving PFLP commandos disguising themselves as Syrian military police. The other front members, meanwhile, called the Hurriya group petty bourgeois and criticized its approach as dogmatic and immature. The adolescent cafe intellectuals were disconnected from Palestinian reality and the guerrilla struggle. Kanafani would speak of, quote, the petty bourgeois intellectuals who are short-tempered and quick to fatigue, who always are in a hurry, proceed along the path of struggle like locusts. After exchanging the petty bourgeoisie accusations, the split manifested just before the front's February 1969 conference. Hawatmeh and the Hurriya group broke away, forming the Popular Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PDFLP, later renamed and better known as the DFLP. Just before that, Ibrahim broke away along with the Lebanese branch of the A&M as well, forming an independent Lebanese socialist organization. We will come back to this one later in the series. Along with the DFLP, it now shared editorial control of Al-Hurriya magazine, making the PFLP start a new one, Al-Hadaf, with Ghassan Kanafani as the editor-in-chief. During the same conference, the PFLP argued that it was the true representative of the proletariat in the refugee camps and officially adopted Marxism-Leninism as the front's political ideology. Habash later lamented the inability to resolve these differences internally. Those two factions would later try to reunite at various points, but in the meantime, the differences were not insignificant, and Hawatmeh will soon make important maneuvers at key political moments of the resistance, but more on that in the next part. People tend to draw hasty conclusions from the split of a very young movement, still struggling with the complex contradictions involved in Palestinian and Arab class relations and the liberation struggle. From Mao's thought, the PFLP adopted the concept of primary and secondary contradictions to formulate its strategy.
The question of Palestine is the question of a contradiction, of a clashing contradiction between the national liberation movement of the Arabs, headed by the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, and between imperialism in this part of the world, headed by the Zionist movement.
The primary effort was national liberation, with the internal class struggle being shaped by this overarching contradiction between imperialism, Zionism, and the Palestinian people. This is why solid national unity of resistance forces is the first task in national liberation. This means that contradictions between the factions are secondary, and that prioritizing those will lead to a weakening of the resistance and to loss of support in the population, since it, first and foremost, desires liberation from foreign domination. As Marx and Engels explained in the case of 19th century Poland, as long as a viable people is held in bondage by a foreign conqueror, it necessarily directs all its strength, all its efforts, all its energy against the external enemy. Thus, its inner life remains paralyzed, and it remains incapable of working for social emancipation. Engels expressed this more plainly in a letter to Karl Kautsky, quote, "Now for a great people, it is historically impossible to even seriously discuss any internal issues as long as national independence is lacking. Polish socialists, who do not place the liberation of the country at the forefront of their program, seem to me like German socialists who would not first demand the abolition of the anti-socialist law. In order to be able to fight, one must first have ground to stand on, air, light, and elbow room. Otherwise, it's all just empty talk." Now, in the case of Palestine, the air, light, and elbow room is as tight as it gets. This does not mean, however, that these secondary contradictions are not important, but that they are best served by tackling them through the lens of the main contradiction, which then allows another secondary contradiction to become the primary one. Pushing the class struggle forward is best achieved through participating in national liberation, so to speak. But here comes the problem, and possibly the most important dilemma of the front throughout the coming years. What if the leading force appears to sell out the cause and serve Israeli interests? How to deal with growing opportunism within your own ranks while following the task of national unity? The PFLP developed a class analysis based on their concrete reality. As a people suffering from the special, overwhelming condition of settler colonialism, they saw the destitute Palestinian refugees residing in camps throughout the region as the core of the proletariat. Importantly, in contrast to the Hurriya group, they also included sections of the Palestinian petty bourgeoisie, educated professionals who had lost their traditional status due to occupation and exile, arguing these were uniquely revolutionary compared to their counterparts elsewhere. In this book, the authors use reductive labels like Stalinist and mechanistic to categorize diverse Palestinian revolutionary groups for their alliance with some Arab states. An examination of the facts reveals that the front was well aware of the dangers of these alliances, in fact more so than some Western booksellers. Habash had been literally jailed by Syria. By not even looking at the concrete history and the reasons for making these alliances, such criticism fails to explain anything. Also very common is the accusation that the Palestinian left was too nationalistic and should have done more outreach to the Israeli working class. Under the mantle of abstract internationalism, these charges stem from a normalization of the oppressor's national chauvinism. Remember, this is not a situation where there are two countries with two people that have lived side by side for centuries. This is one country, where one set of people is living on stolen land from which the other is displaced and militarily occupied. Just like the Jewish-led Communist Party before the Nakba in Palestine, these authors regard the national and the class question as two isolated, separate things and fail to see their interconnection. We will talk more about the class analysis in Palestine and the Israeli working class in a coming video, since this is an important topic in today's discourse. For now, let's note down that the PFLP viewed the interconnection of these two spheres, writing, "National liberation is class struggle." Or as Marx said in relation to the British occupation of Ireland, quote, "The Irish question is therefore not simply a question of nationality, but one of land and existence." The Front regarded wealthier Palestinians as less likely to advance liberation, since the toiling classes had felt the loss of their homeland in a more material sense, whereas the upper classes tend to subscribe to sentimental feelings of loss through a rhetorical patriotism, impotent anger, sad longing, all abstracted from any kind of political commitment or action. Although these classes are hindered in fulfilling their own bourgeois nationalist interests, they have greater potential to be successful by succumbing to the enemy, becoming a comprador bourgeoisie, a temptation whose consequences are about to unfold over the next few decades. Aside from the two Marxist fronts, there was also the aforementioned Jewish-led Palestine Communist Party. After the establishment of the State of Israel and the annexation of the West Bank by Jordan, West Bank Palestinians joined the Jordanian Communist Party, JCP, which prioritized rebuilding and non-violent organizing, considering immediate guerrilla fighting premature and adventurous. The separate Palestinian Communist Organization, PCO, in Gaza also started with non-violent protest, but shifted to armed struggle during '67, facing heavy repression. During this period, many members left these groups due to their military inaction to join Fatah and the other fronts. In the 80s, a JCP section merged with the Gaza organization, forming another Palestine Communist Party, today known as the Palestinian People's Party, which then joined the PLO in '87. They will eventually back the Oslo Accords, but today criticize its failures, though they still support a two-state solution based on the '67 borders. We're going to talk about Oslo more in depth later in this series. In the lead-up to the 2021 elections, the Palestine People's Party wanted to join with the PFLP and the DFLP to form a joint leftist list. However, differences between the PPP and the Front caused the negotiations to break down. The PPP is more of an establishment organization and still prioritizes peaceful mass action over armed resistance. The question of armed resistance strategy was crucial in the period after '67, especially during the legendary Battle of Karame of 1968 we talked about in the last video. The imprisonment of Habash by Syria left Ahmad Jibril, leader of the Syrian-supported faction, temporarily in charge. At a meeting before the battle, disagreement arose. Fatah argued for staying and fighting. Jibril called this adventurism and decided the PFLP should withdraw its forces from the village. The front's withdrawal proved costly. Fatah gained immense prestige and popular support from the victory at Karame. Along with later internal splits, this also contributed to the front playing catch-up to Fatah in terms of public support and influence, condemning them, as some analyses put it, to a permanent second place. The Karame battle changed everything, with the guerrillas overtaking the bureaucratic PLO leadership in popularity and PLO seats, as talked about in the Fatah video. The front, just like Fatah, was highly skeptical of this body created by the Arab states, but did eventually participate. The PLO now became the official institution of the United Resistance Forces. At the National Council session in February of 1969, the Front was angry with an unfair allocation of seats and boycotted the session. Their boycott now enabled Fatah to secure the election, with Arafat being elected as the chairman. We will keep seeing this important dynamic throughout the next videos. Habash himself, hearing the Karame news from prison, was reportedly pleased by its outcome, seeing any action highlighting the cause as beneficial. But the PFLP had missed a key moment, and opportunities to rectify this perceived strategic error would soon arise in dramatic fashion as the PFLP sought to make its own mark on the world stage. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the next part, where we're gonna tackle the period in which the PFLP took the battle to the whole world. A period of peak internationalism involving groups across the globe making the Palestinian cause the cause of the workers of all countries. A period which escalated the sharpening contradictions with Jordan into all-out war and further revealing a growing rift between the PFLP and Fatah, culminating in the Fatah leadership's fateful turn, a path that Habash would argue led to betrayal. Make sure to go out on 1st of May, and we're gonna end with a quote by Habash on his May 1st speech in 1970 in front of thousands at a camp in Jordan. Quote, "We celebrate Workers' Day because we believe that the working class is the leader of the revolution for liberation, and it is only through its theory, positions, and concepts that one can achieve victory and liberation."
من غزة من قدس العربي من غزة من قدس العربي من أسر النقمة والتعبي من أسر النقمة والتعبي اخرج كالريح ولا تهبي اخرج كالريح ولا تهبي يا جيل النخوة والغضب يا جيل النخوة والغضب وتدخل